Hello YouTube, I'm Slyelessar. This is basically a video on street photography settings on cameras, specifically the Ricoh GR2 film cameras and my Fuji X-T2, which is recording this video right now. I've recently been asked by a subscriber to go over my street photography settings for my Ricoh GR2, so I'll quickly get into that. I shoot in P mode, program mode, specifically on the street with the snap focus setting set at 1 meter, sometimes 1.5, usually 1 meter though, because I need to know how to gauge it. Let me just quickly stick a picture up. So this gives you an idea of the kind of shots that you get from about 1 meter away. Let me stick another one up. Okay, so as you can see, it's very close quarters. These have been shot from the hip most of the time. You might be able to tell, and I always like that really close 1 meter angle. It's a wide angle lens, so it picks up quite a lot of the environment, or you can just squeeze everything into the frame. Handy for composition. Anyway, back to the Ricoh GR2. So yes, shoot in P mode with the snap function. On the back here is an ISO dial. It allows you to change the ISO, adjust the ideal aperture and shutter speed to the ISO that you set. I always shoot with ISO 800 or 1600 on the streets, very much specifically on London streets. That will change obviously depending on lighting. That's always that applies to any of this. You're reading the light, the settings always go with whatever lighting that you have available, but it's very rare I'll go under 800 just because I want that high shutter speed to make sure that everything's in focus and everything's sharp, unless I obviously want motion blur within the picture to help tell a story. Yes, so that's the general settings for that. There is a AV mode, TV mode, so that's aperture priority, TV is shutter priority, which just gives you variations of the P mode. There is a manual mode. I know there's a couple of YouTubers that love using this camera in manual, and I'm a manual shooter, but for me this is a one-handed camera that's used for really quick. I'm walking along very quickly in the street, snapping as I'm going along, or I'm traveling and I just want a small camera to take with me. So I don't really use manual on this camera. I think I've only used it a couple of times. I know that Matthias Berling loves the manual on this camera and some of the compact cameras, but I don't generally use that. There's an autofocus lock switch on the back, and I don't really use it, really, to be honest. I just leave it in the up mode and don't press the button, but the button's there if you need it. Macro I'll use when I want to shoot fairly close. I think it's about 30 centimeters away it can shoot. It's quite handy. This camera has auto ND filters. You can choose to select it yourself or have it on auto. I stick it on auto, so it will choose appropriately. I shoot in RAW plus JPEG, so I can edit the RAWs when I get home. I just want to see the black and white JPEGs on the screen when I'm shooting, just to help me give me an idea of what I'm doing. I turn that focus assist lamp off. I always do that on all the cameras. That's just distracting and annoying for street photography, I find, personally. And there's various function buttons. You can assign different things. I'm sure I did at some point. I just don't use them like that. I use it as a very quick run and gun camera. There's a flash, pop-up flash. I rarely use that. It can come in handy though. It's an alright flash. And then when I'm on holiday or doing my own stuff, I'll just use the autofocus mode because it's slow, but it works. It's a compact camera. It's with me. It's APS-C. Aspect ratio 3:2. But in general, for photography, I use specifically these settings. Obviously, it's down to reading the light. Sunny 16 most of the time, because I shoot manual, so that just brings me on to film. I'll quickly jump in there with film. So this is Olympus SP rangefinder. All the controls are on the front. Obviously it's film, so you have the ASA of the film, and it pretty much stays out. I know you can change it, you know, if you want to look at different exposures, compensate for all of that, etc. However, shooting black and white film, generally on the streets, I use 400 ASA film, and I will shoot it to 800 or 1600 and then just have it pushed when it's getting developed. I used to develop, or I've attempted to develop myself, and then it just didn't work out the way I wanted it, and it's just quicker for my workflow for someone else to develop it. Obviously, depending on the lighting, it tends to change what the shutter speed and aperture is. I tend to make sure I've got the highest shutter speed possible, just so I can freeze the motion when it's there. Again, Sunny 16 is probably your most reliable friend out on the streets in terms of this. 800 ASA, f16, f11, f8, f5.6, they're generally the apertures I choose just to get a bit bigger depth of field. And I won't go below 60th, and I'll probably, yeah, the range will be 60th, 125, 250, 500. Most film, the old film cameras that I use only go up to 1/500th, that's as fast as they go. I do make use of the wide apertures, the fast apertures when needed. Focusing, generally I'll manual focus, so I'm just focusing on my lamp. As I mentioned with the Ricoh GR2, I've got that on the snap focus 1 meter. You can just pre-focus before you go, which is handy, especially on the rangefinder cameras, because they tend to be more accurate. I've noticed in terms of the scaling and where you are, things like that. And most rangefinders, or certainly the older ones, they only focus, the minimum focusing difference is usually about 1 meter. This one is 0.85 of a meter, so 85 centimeters, which is about the same as perfect really, and then 1 meter, it's on there. So it does work, it's very handy. Again, Sunny 16 on the streets, but I always push it to 800 or 1600. Colour film is a bit different. The most I will push that is 1 stop in development. So say Fuji Pro 400H, usually only push that about 1 stop or pull it 1 stop. So I will shoot it at 800 or I will shoot it at 200, and then in development have them push or pull it. Portra 400 is a bit different. Portra 400 I can shoot at 1600 and have it developed at 1600 and still get good results with it, especially if you want to convert it to black and white. That's film. That brings me on to so when I go out with the X-T2, I have a couple of different ways that I shoot on the streets with that. The first one is I will put it on auto aperture, and then I will set my shutter speed to probably around 1/500th. It's a sunny day like this, probably, I don't know, 1/2000th, something like that. I might even have it on A mode on the shutter. In the programming I'll limit it, so it's a minimum of 1/60th or 1/25th, and then the maximum can be whatever it is, I think 1/4000th, oh, 1/8000th. I mean, you know, I don't think I really used that. So yeah, I'll manually adjust the ISO myself as I'm going along. Again, 200, 400, usually at 800 and 1600, even on digital, because I like the grain, I shoot black and white predominantly. And then adjusting the shutter and aperture appropriately, most specifically the shutter, because I usually want to capture motion flat, sharp, no blur. Again, unless I intentionally want to do that, that's something else altogether. Yeah, I rarely shoot Aperture Priority. I know a lot of people like Aperture Priority and Auto ISO. I don't use Auto ISO because I want to control that. If I did shoot Auto ISO, I would limit it, so I probably wouldn't have it going above 3200. Anything above that, it just gets a bit silly. I don't like the results so much. I don't feel that, although cameras have come a long way, I don't feel that anything above 3200 is, for me personally, I don't like the way it looks, and I like grainy film, I like grainy images, but yeah, there's only so far you can really push it without it looking a bit obvious and silly, and you can say you use it for effect and blah blah blah, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's just generally the way I shoot on the street. So the Ricoh is P mode with the snap function of a meter. I control the ISO, but it's usually at 800 and 1600. I shoot in black and white. Rarely use the flash, but I do use the macro quite a lot. With film and digital, so the ISO/ASA, I will have the film pushed a stop or two in development, and the same. And with digital, I will use a higher ISO to get a higher shutter speed and a not so wide aperture. That's generally what I use, but I mean, lighting is dictated by the lighting and the scenario. If you're shooting in the shadows, yeah, you're gonna lower your shutter speed or open up your aperture more. It's just normal. That's how the exposure triangle works. I can't really go in much more discussion. I know the focus most people want is on the Ricoh GR2, but you can't go wrong with this camera. Okay, I've been Slyelessar. Have a good one. Quantum shift ain't gonna get me.